but not in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. They returned to Brown Chapel, a battered prophet, bandages around his head. And he said, more marchers will come now. And the people came. And the troopers parted. And the marchers reached the gun. And their words reached the White House. And Lyndon Johnson, son of the South, said, we shall overcome. And the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. The life of John Lewis was in so many ways exceptional. Vindicated the faith in our founding, redeemed that faith. That most American of ideas, the idea that any of us, ordinary people without rank, or wealth, or title, or fame, can somehow point out the imperfections of this nation and come together and challenge the status quo. Decide that it is in our power to remake this country that we love until it more closely aligns with our highest ideals. What a radical idea. What a revolutionary notion. This idea that any of us, ordinary people, a young kid from Troy, stand up to the powers and principalities and say, no, this isn't right, this isn't true, this isn't just. We can do better. On the battlefield of justice, Americans like John, Americans like Reverend Lowry, C.T. Bibby, two other patriots that we lost this year, liberated all of us. And many Americans came to take for granted. America was built by people like him. America was built by John Lewis's. He, as much as anyone in our history, brought this country a little bit closer to our highest ideals. Someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America. And yet, as exceptional as John was, here's the thing, John never believed that what he did was more than any citizen of this country could do. I mentioned in the statement the day John passed, the thing about John was just how gentle and humble he was. And despite this storied, remarkable career, he treated everyone with kindness and respect because it was innate to him. This idea that any of us can do what he did if we're willing to persevere. He believed that in all of us there exists the capacity for great courage. That in all of us there's a longing to do what's right. That in all of us there's a willingness to love all people and to extend to them their God-given rights to dignity and respect. So many of us lose that sense. It's taught out of us. We start feeling as if, in fact, we can't afford to extend kindness or decency to other people. That we're better off if we're above other people and looking down on them. And so often that's encouraged in our culture. But John always said, he always saw the best in us. And he never gave up. And never stopped speaking out because he saw the best in us. He believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. And as a congressman he didn't arrest, he kept getting himself arrested. As an old man, he didn't sit out any fight. Sat in all night long on the floor of the United States Capitol. I know his staff was stressed. The testing of his faith produced perseverance. He knew that the march is not over, that the race is not yet won, that we had not yet reached that blessed destination where we are judged by the content of our character. He knew from his own life that progress is fragile, that we have to be vigilant against the darker currents of this country's history, of our own history. There are whirlpools of violence and hatred and despair. It can always rise again. Bull Connor may be gone. Today, we witness with our own eyes police officers kneeling on the necks of Black Americans. George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick. I know this is a celebration of John's life. Some might say we shouldn't dwell on such things. But that's what I'm talking about. John Lewis devoted his time on this earth fighting the very attacks on democracy and what's best in America that we're seeing circulate right now. He knew that every single one of us has a God-given power. democracy depends on how we use it. That democracy isn't automatic. It has to be nurtured. It has to be tended to. We have to work at it. It's hard. So he knew that it depends on whether we summon just to measure John's moral courage, to question what's right and what's wrong, and call things as they are. He said that as long as he had a breath in his body, he would do everything he could to preserve this democracy. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we have to continue this cause. If we want our children to grow up in a democracy, not just with elections, but a true democracy, a representative democracy, big, hearted, tolerant, vibrant, inclusive America, perpetual self-creation, then we're going to have to be more like John. We don't have to do all the things he had to do because he did them for us. But we got to do something. The Lord instructed Paul, do not be afraid. Go on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. Just, everybody's got to come out. Oh, we got all those people in the city, but they can't do nothing. Like John, we've got to keep getting into that good trouble. He knew that nonviolent protest is patriotic. A way to raise public awareness, put a spotlight on injustice, and make the powers that be uncomfortable. Like John, we don't have to choose between protest and politics. It's not an either-or situation. It's a both-and situation. We have to engage in protests where that's effective, but we also have to translate our passion and our causes into laws, into institutional practices. That's why John ran for Congress 34 years ago. Like John, we've got to fight even harder with the most powerful tool that we have, which is the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act is one of the crowning achievements of our democracy. That's why John crossed that bridge. That's why he spilled his blood. And by the way, it was the result of Democratic and Republican efforts. President Bush, who spoke here earlier, and his father signed its renewal when they were in office. President Clinton didn't have to because it was the law when he arrived, so instead he made a law to make it easier for people to register to vote. But once the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act, some state legislators unleashed a flood of laws designed specifically to make voting harder. Especially, by the way, state legislators where there's a lot of minority turnout, population growth. That's not necessarily a mystery or an accident. There's an attack on what John fought for. It was an attack on our democratic freedoms. We should treat them as such. If politicians want to honor John, and I'm so grateful for the legacy of work all congressional leaders who are here. But there's a better way than a statement called him a hero. You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for. And by the way, naming it the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that is a fine tribute. But John wouldn't want us to stop there, just trying to get back to where we already were. Once we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we should keep marching to make it even better. By making sure every American is automatically registered to vote, including former inmates who've earned their second chance. By adding polling places and expanding early voting and making Election Day a national holiday. So if you are somebody who's working in a factory, or you're a single mom who's got to go to her job and then get time off, you can still cast your ballot. By guaranteeing that every American citizen has equal representation in our government, including the American citizens who live in Washington, D.C. and in Puerto Rico. They're Americans. By ending some of the partisan gerrymandering so that all voters have the power to choose their politicians, not the other way around. And if all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do. And even if we do all this, even if every bogus voter suppression law is struck off the books today, we have to be honest with ourselves that too many of us choose not to exercise the franchise. Too many of our citizens believe their vote won't make a difference, or they buy into the cynicism that, by the way, is the central strategy of voter suppression, to make you discouraged, to stop believing in your own power. We're also going to have to remember what John said. If you don't do everything you can do to change things, then they will remain the same. You only pass this way once. You have to give it all you have. As long as young people are protesting in the streets, hoping real change takes hold, I'm hopeful, but we can't casually abandon them at the ballot box. Not when few elections have been as urgent on so many levels as this one. We can't treat voting as an errand to run if we have some time. We have to treat it as the most important action we can take on behalf of democracy. Like John, we have to give it all we have. I was proud that John Lewis was a friend of mine. I met him when I was in law school. He came to speak. And I went up and I said, Mr. Lewis, you are one of my heroes. What inspired me more than anything as a young man was to see what you and Ross, Bob Moses, Diane Nash, others did. And he got that kind of all shucks. Thank you very much. Next time I saw him, I'd been elected to the United States Senate. And I told him, John, I'm here because of you. And on Inauguration Day in 2008, 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand